So anyway, rant time over. I am putting a fork in it. We are done ranting over a game that I don't even play.
But now we can rant about rolling coal in your economy car.
Yes, but I don't think it'll be a rant because I think we're going to be on the same page on this. Um, the story is Volkswagen is deep in its own soot. However you say that.
Soot, yes.
Yeah, I said that wrong. But yes, and I hate people rolling coal. There are a few diesel trucks out here that they'll do that, and it's a complete waste. It doesn't it doesn't give you more energy, and it's just a waste of energy.
We certainly could rant about that. Apparently, Patrick Norton has got in on this as well. I listened to This Week in Tech since building the notes for our subject line here. Patrick Norton owns two diesels apparently, and he knows what's going on with this. But what he didn't know was how Volkswagen was doing what they were doing. Now, to give a little backfill on those listening that do not know what was going on with Volkswagen, if you haven't been shelled yet with all of this Dieselgate news, Volkswagen has approximately 11 million of these so called clean diesel vehicles around the world, including the hundreds of thousands that they sold in the States. Now, Volkswagen, since 2008, have been advertising these TDI models, the turbo diesel vehicles like the Jetta, the Passat, even the Audi S3, and a few other vehicles, as clean. Now, one thing they have been doing differently than the rest of the automotive industry is they are not using what's known as AdBlue or a urea after injection system, basically cat pee, shooting that into the hot exhaust of the diesel in order to reduce emissions, specifically NOx emissions. And with today's current strict EPA emissions requirements, you have to have that system on there. But thankfully, it keeps our air much cleaner, so we don't have as much smog and soot flying around in the air. Diesels are fairly bad at putting out particulate matter, basically the smoke you can see. Now, when you see someone rolling coal, typically in a pickup truck of a large size and a large diesel engine, what they're doing there is just burning their fuel in massive amounts. This is in no way what Volkswagen is doing. What those rolling coal bros are doing, they are basically choking the engine because the engine needs lots of oxygen to burn off the fuel so it can make the power. But when it's not making power, when it's being suffocated essentially, it spills out soot from the tailpipe. But what Volkswagen is doing is they had a cheat mode on their cars where when it thinks it's being tested, it will retard the engine throttle or the engine mapping a bit, producing less torque. And in the video I linked in the show notes, it detects the emissions test by the rear wheels not spinning. These are almost all front wheel drive cars. So when the rear wheels are not spinning, the car thinks, I'm not on the road and I must be in a testing facility. So it's hooked up to the computer to test for emissions. It's trying to burn cleaner specifically, but in order to do so, it burns less fuel. And of course, less fuel equals less emissions. But when it's out on the road, it's emitting anywhere between roughly 5 to 40 times what is legally allowed. Now, what is legally allowed, even at 40 times the limit, it's not as nasty as someone, say, rolling coal in their pickup truck. It's much better than what Oldsmobile was doing back in the 80s.
Yeah, that's. I do have to wonder. Yes, it's 40 times what's legally allowed, but I'd like for somebody to be able to put that into context. Like, if I drank 40 times the legal limit of alcohol, well, I'm dead long before then. But if I drank, or if there was 40 times, I'm trying to think of a good example. If there was a contaminant, if there was 40 times more Oh, here's a gross one. I can't. Everything I'm thinking of is either gross or stupid. But
What if
you're
you take
allowed,
40 Tylenols? You're going to overdose and you potentially could kill yourself, but
right?
it's not
But I'm
that
talking.
bad.
Well, no, that's pretty bad. That's
It's
they'll
pretty horrible.
kill your liver. But what I'm thinking of is like you're allowed so much rat hair in chocolate. You had 40 times the rat hair in chocolate in some chocolate you bought. You're gonna notice it, but it's not going to hurt you. So that's what I'm saying. It's a gross example, but I'm just wondering, 40 times legal limit of alcohol kills you. 40 times rat hair and chocolate grosses you out. Does it fall in that range? Is it, you know,
It's more of the gross out
well,
um,
yeah. So
stage because even at 40 times the EPA limit, it's not terrible. You still don't see it like belching black smoke or even puttering out smoke like you would see in older cars. You can tell when there's like an older diesel, like the Mercedes-Benz 300 SL. That was a really sought after vehicle, and it also had a diesel variant from the 80s. You can kind of see some smoke coming out of those.
right,
This was before the modern EPA regulation, and those are actually nastier than these offending Volkswagens. But this stuff adds up, essentially. The EPA wants a certain limit to keep overall emissions down and keep
right.
the air clean. That's the purpose of the EPA, is to protect the environment. So you don't have the same issue, say, China is with their megacities. They're having a major influx of all of these toxic fumes.
Or
But
Mexico City. I don't know if that's still the case, but at one time Mexico City was the most polluted city in the world.
really,
Yeah,
did
and I
not know.
do remember here where we lived at, we used to have the smog warnings was part of the weather forecast, and
It's
you'd go into town, you would see it just be a haze over everything, and it's not cloudy. It's just everything is all hazed over. That doesn't happen often anymore.
No, that's because newer cars are getting cleaner and cleaner. Considering we have millions of cars on the road all across the world and in these dense urban areas, even though you don't really see anything coming out of the tailpipe of your relatively clean car, it builds up. It's got to go somewhere. It's not
Right.
like it all just floats out into space and forms a new star.
Yeah,
There's other effects like air pressure and gravity bringing that stuff back down. So it's got
that's
to go somewhere.
good because there would be no atmosphere if there wasn't.
Exactly. Take that, coal rolling nut jobs.
Yeah, you tell
Little
them.
little side story. I hit my brakes hard one day coming up the hill from my house because I thought this truck that was coming the other way was on fire. But what it was a plain white Dodge Dually pickup truck with a Cummins diesel engine. And apparently, he had the exhaust system modified and chipped and tuned specifically to roll a bit of coal, and he had stacks on the back. What it turned out to be was he was accelerating from a stop to pull, I kid you not, a small trailer with a very basic riding lawnmower. It was like, I got the strong truck, I'm spewing smoke. Screw you, tree hugging hipsters. It's like, A, I'm not a tree hugging hipster, and B, you're pulling a freaking lawnmower. I could literally pull that with a Yaris in its mighty 100 horsepower, which is a joke. There's people out there are just that bullheaded on the subject to go to such an extreme. A, you don't need a truck that can literally tow 30,000 pounds for a tiny lawnmower with a small trailer, and you do not need to roll soot everywhere in order to do it. It's more of a statement than anything. But I want to emphasize Volkswagen is not doing that. Where the biggest issue comes with them, they knowingly had software installed that would cheat the emissions test. And for years, they pushed for tax breaks. And during the Bush administration, it was like 2006, 2007, while the government was pushing for even tighter emissions regulations like they do like every few years or so. And they are advertising to the consumers that these are clean vehicles. So people go to the Volkswagen store, they buy the vehicle expecting it to be clean and get good fuel economy. it turns out that they were being lied to. The Volkswagen was lying to the government, they were lying to the consumers. This is all over cost cutting. And Volkswagen's mad drive to become the number one selling corporation in the automotive industry, trying to beat out Ford, Toyota, and General Motors, they decided to cut corners. The thing is, on these cars, it would have cost them a grand total of $335 per vehicle to install an AdBlue system. That is all. It for the entire offending base of,
Right.
I think it may have just been the U.S.
No, it's
maybe
worldwide.
It was the worldwide.
It's
At
every one of them.
$335, it would have cost them like less than $4 billion. Now,
Right.
at a minimum, before the penalties, they're looking at $7.5 billion. Just for a side note, in 2013, they had a net profit of $10.8 billion. So that 1 year's profit could have paid for this mistake that's now a huge, huge black soot stain on Volkswagen's face.
We'll just have to see what the legislation does, because I don't know what the penalties are. I'm sure that there's written into law somewhere putting defeat devices are specifically outlawed. So I'm sure there's a penalty already written into the law, and it may be right. It may be like, remember when Harry Potter was big, when they were releasing new books? I don't know if this is Walmart, all the Walmarts, but I know the Walmart where I used to live, they would put the books accidentally out on the shelf the day before they were supposed to be released.
Okay.
Which is a big no-no. And what happened is they got fined $10,000. But by putting them out early, they got a whole bunch of extra business they wouldn't have gotten normally. Because they went and bought the books, and most people who bought the books bought other stuff. So they came out, they paid $10,000 for the penalty, got all the business, all the extra business, and then that was it. I mean,
it's a calculated risk as far as they're concerned that pays off. It's just one that pays off.
And I think Volkswagen is probably doing the same thing, because HP did the same thing back in the late 80s, maybe early 90s. Instead of putting a processor fan on their computers, they put a big heat sink that saved them, I think, 24 cents per computer. But that meant, after a few months, everybody's computers were way overheating because they were running too hot. But it cost them less money to fix or replace the ones that melted down, and people went and tried to actually claim insurance on them or claim a warranty on it, and just not, instead of actually doing it correctly. So I think that's what Volkswagen's doing. But like I said, we'll see. I feel bad for the people too. The people who work for Volkswagen that had nothing to do with it, because if they do get nailed, it's going to hurt the workers. And I also feel bad for the people who own these Volkswagens, because now I'm afraid what's going to happen is these cars, because they'll never meet emissions, you can't sell them.
Right now, it is illegal to sell. So if someone was trying to personally sell their Volkswagen before, for whatever reason, whether it be like college money, or I don't need the second car, or I'm trying to pay for a hospital bill kind of thing, they can't sell it.
Right.
Because it's an illegally modified vehicle.
Well, it's not an illegally modified vehicle.
It falls under that category. And it can break multiple laws, including federal, state, and local, depending on where these owners live.
Right.
And
well, I know if you have a car that's not going through this weird cheating issue, you have a car in an emission state that doesn't meet emissions, you can't sell it until it meets emissions, but you can drive it yourself forever.
In most cases.
I mean, if it's a danger. But I guess that's what's going to end up happening, is they're going to be treated like that. But then they can't ever make it meet emissions. You could reprogram it so it behaves as though it's always being tested, which means it probably won't be a very good vehicle.
Right. Well, I did a little calculation one time. For over 100,000 miles, if a typical Volkswagen owner lost 5 mpg off of their 50 mpg highway mileage, at typical local diesel prices over the past year and a half, they would have lost roughly $666 over that 100,000 miles. So 2/3 of 1,000. It's not a huge amount of money over the course of time. and that is assuming a big loss in fuel economy for the vehicle. Volkswagen may have to pay that back as well, but what it would have originally cost them if they simply put the AdBlue system in at $335 per car, that's only $3,685,000,000, as opposed to the potentially $1,000 per car that they're looking at now because of the forecasted $7.5 billion that they are going to spend in the near future just to fix the cars, not including state, federal, and local penalties, as well as international penalties and penalties for having to pay for lost value in customers' cars and lost fuel economy and performance. They have to be compensated for that because they lied to the consumer. Kia Hyundai recently, as recently as last year, I believe, had to pay consumers a small amount of cash for lost fuel economy from them overestimating the capability of their car's fuel economy. And there's that precedent. Yes.
All right. Well, I mean, we'll just have to see because I'm glad there is precedent. At least it sounds like for some of this stuff because it's, as far as I know, no one has at least this blatantly cheated the EPA.
No, this is potentially the second largest recall in history that they will have to perform in order to fix this. But it's certainly going to be one of the most expensive. GM just recently walked away with less than $125 million. It may be something like $96 million in federal penalties, and people actually died. Volkswagen, on the other hand, they're in much deeper soot.
I guess you could say literally, but bump.
But being around Lonnie is like instantly just right. I gave her the grand Psycho House tour and took my revenge on Super.
But we're definitely behind right now.